How does the size of your company dictate the audience of people that are going to buy it? Not necessarily who specifically, but what does the audience look like? How does it typically work? Are we going to get lots of offers? Are we going to get a few offers? What's kind of the shape, if you will, of the audience for your company depending on the size of your business? That's what we're going to dig into today. I'm Arthur Petropoulos, managing partner and president here at Hillview Partners. We're a middle market, lower middle market M&A capital markets firm, investment banking firm. We sell companies, we find companies capital, typically companies generating $1 million to about $20 million a year in pre-tax earnings or EBITDA across all industries, all different kinds of businesses, different seasons of business. This is what we do all day and all night. $1 billion plus, over 150 deals over the last 9 years, and we're just getting started as we continue to grow our firm. Now, that being said, you have a company you want to sell. How does the size of your business dictate kind of what the audience is going to look like? Because people always ask us, okay, so for a company like mine, what should the audience feel like? Is there going to be a lot of competition? How does it tend to work? And so we were thinking of it, and we said, really, the shape of a audience is kind of 4 different shapes, and that'll depend on the size of the business. So we're going to draw this out, and today we'll make it a fairly quick video, as I say, 15 minutes ahead of time, but let's say here, right? Now, for good measure, let's say M&A audience shape for business exits. All right. So now let's set up sizes of a company too, right? Let's say your company makes $0 to $1 million of EBITDA per year. And then let's say in this situation, company makes $1 million to $2 million EBITDA per year. This situation, let's say we're looking like 2 million to 5 million of EBITDA per year. Finally, this is 5 million plus of EBITDA. And let's just say more so 10 million plus. You'll get to it. It'll make sense when we get there. All right. So now we say, what is the shape of an audience? This isn't just like a mood ring of what color are we looking at, but the shape of an audience. So when we have sold businesses that have been under $1 million of EBITDA, namely because they've had a particular access point or capability, it's still not the easiest thing in the world. Your audience tends to look like. So if a company is $1 million of EBITDA or less, and we've sold businesses like that, namely because they have particular access or capabilities, something special about them. Let's find a darker color here. Let's just think of blurbs, right? It's a bit random. You're going to find some people that want it for a lot of money, some people that want it for a little bit of money, but it's going to look like a kind of a blob of data points. And that's why it's difficult. We really say like institutionally acquirable businesses tend to be $1 million is the big cutoff. $1 million EBITDA opens up the audience. It puts you into a much more kind of understandable realm of data. And so we don't sell companies under $1 million of EBITDA as of this last really kind of 2 years or so, because it just is a randomness and it takes a tremendous amount of energy to try to do it. But our best advice to people when they say, hey, my company does $500,000 of EBITDA, I'd like to sell it. Our best advice is just keep working on it until you hit $1 million, because that's when value is going to get through the, really increase, let's call it. The multiples expand, and it's not just the multiple expansion. So people say, oh, what's the multiple for $500,000? You say, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times maybe. And they say, oh, but if I get to $1 million, we say, yeah, and then you're probably looking at 4 to 8 times, or 4 to 7 times, or 5 to 7 times, depending on scenarios. And they say, oh, well, that's okay. I'll just take a little bit less. But it's not linear. That's the point. So you have here this kind of blurb of information. So now when we go to the $1 million to $2 million EBITDA, the shape I like to look at is more like a plateau. And so what I mean by this is you're going to have a few interested buyers that are at a pretty good slot here. And again, this can be really, really good in the sense that we can find lots of buyers. But what we find is you're going to have a quick drop off either direction if the audience doesn't come through. So it's important in a situation like this. Like you cannot, if the company's between $1 million and $2 million of EBITDA, you do have to take care of the leads, if you will, of the prospective acquirers, because it tends to fall off. It's not just this linear thing where, oh, someone will just pay 3% less, someone will pay 3% less. We've had situations of $1 million of EBITDA, and and I think it's worth noting, in this case, it's really like $1 million to $2 million of EBITDA if it does it for 1 year, because that impacts it. So we're going to include here 1x. just to imply that, 1 times of this in the sense of like it's happened once. So, but keep that in mind. The shape of it is a bit of a cliff. You're going to have a bunch of offers, but it's going to fall off pretty quickly one way or the other. So you might have 5 offers, you could have 6 offers, and then after that, it kind of falls off dramatically in terms of valuation. Now, $2 to $5 million of EBITDA, it starts to take a different shape. So think of a triangle. Those are not, this would fail. The Pythagoras or whatever the theorem of added degrees points for angles, but you get the point. Did not do well in geometry, I suppose. I like calculus and algebra better. Nonetheless, think of a triangle. So in this situation, it's $2 to $5 million of EBITDA, but I'll also caveat, I'd put also in this $1 million of EBITDA times 2. So if you have companies that are $2 to $5 million of EBITDA, or it's been north of $1 million in EBITDA at least 2 years in a row, then you'll have a situation where it's much more of a triangle. So you'll have top offers here, and then maybe every other offer, you have a few at the top, and then maybe they start to slide down. But again, it's not falling off a cliff. So in this case, it's random. In the case of the smaller deal, the $1 million to $2 million, if it's just 1 year of that, you're going to have a few at the top and then it's going to fall off quickly. But if you have $1 million more than 1 year in a row, or you have $2 to $5 million, even if it's the first time, you're going to have much more of the triangle. And then last shape of an audience, let's call it the bell curve. And so this is where markets start to get more efficient. Now, I'd say also in this situation, if you have, 2 to 5 million 2 times. So we'll give it kind of like the same caveat as we did with, the 1 million more than once. If you have $2 to $5 million of EBITDA at least 2 times, or it's $5 million of EBITDA or more, you're going to have the key people or the highest bids here, and then every other bid's going to go slightly down. So you might say, okay, well, I've got a top bid at X, and the next bid is at 98% of X, and 96% of X, and 94% of X, right? And so if you think about it, the whole sizing of the deals starts to track towards kind of what the public markets are. So in the public markets of selling a business, think of what selling shares of a stock is selling a business. So if I went to go buy a share of Facebook, and you went to go buy a share of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's lizard brain would be thrilled. But jokes aside, the price we'd pay would be almost identically the same. Maybe it changes a cent or two one way or the other if it's kind of done around the same time period. But the idea is that the bigger the company, the more the efficiency in the pricing. So the corollary of that, or the alternate of that, is the smaller a company, the less efficient the pricing. And so the more disparity, so the more you're going to have, the more deviate, once you get beyond kind of the high offers for something, how quickly does it fall down? So that's kind of the concept that we want to incorporate here, that we really want to emphasize. So let's go over it again, kind of all 4 shapes in which scenario and what you can expect. If you have a company that's doing less than $1 million of EBITDA, the process of selling it and the audience is going to be somewhat random. Now, again, sufficient amount of data, sufficient amount of iterations will somewhat mitigate or solve that randomness. However, it will still largely be a somewhat random process. You'll have data points all over the place. We've sold companies that have done $500,000 of EBITDA for 6, 7 times before. We've also sold them for 3 times. There's a lot of disparity. And our best advice to people who are not making $1 million of EBITDA is work on getting there. And if you are going to sell, just be prepared that it's going to be a bit of choppy waters. Still get good outcomes, but it's a little choppy, and there's going to be a randomness. You're not going to see a clean shape to the audience. Now, if we go to companies that make $1 million to $2 million a year in EBITDA, and say they've done it once, so they were 500, then $1 million to $2 million, that's where we see this kind of, top of a trapezoid or whatever you want to call it. But it's kind of like a table, if you will. You're going to have a handful of offers kind of across the top, and then it's going to fall off a cliff. Not necessarily that the offers are going to get way lower. There just might not be other offers, because in that situation, again, if it's done at once, then it's a tougher audience, because you're going to have people saying, can they do it again? Is it going to fall back to kind of no man's land of sub-$1 million or not? And so that's kind of the audience. Now, there's still very, very good offers to be had. However, you have to be careful in making sure that the offers that you have, you protect, because there's not an endless audience. It's not like selling a house where if you just lower the price $10,000, you get more offers to the table. It just doesn't work that way. So number 3, this is kind of the sweet spot where we do most of our deals, is either companies doing $2 to $5 million of EBITDA, or companies that have done $1 million to $2 million a year in multiple years in a row. That's where you start getting depth of market. So you have the high offers, and then you have the next rung of offers, the next rung of offers, the next rung of offers. It starts to look like an efficient market, and that's where you have more leverage because you have more participants and gets you more pressure upward. And then is our second largest category of deals. So I'd say the highest category of deals we do is 2 million to 5 million, and kind of the 1 to 2 million multiple years. Then second is going to be tied between the 1 to 2 million first year and the 5 million plus. As well. But for the 5 million plus, you start to get a bell curve. You start to say, okay, there's a pretty deep audience here. And now it's just a matter of finding the optimal price, structure, and transition. So in different scenarios, you're doing slightly different things. In this kind of upper right quadrant here of this 1 to 2 million, the top 2, you're really in the business of trying to find buyers, getting people to the table, getting eyeballs on things, because a lot of times they're going to say, this is great, however, it's a little bit small. Whereas in the bottom 2 situations, you're going to be focused more on negotiation. You're focused on negotiation no matter what, but it's going to be less of a challenge of finding audience, more of a challenge of kind of sifting prospects and suspects. So in any event, all of this green, there's got to be some money somewhere, right? All of this writing is to say, not only think about the price, the structure, the transition that we've discussed in many, many videos. However, think about the shape of the audience and what that means for your company when you sell it. So, hope the week's going well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. Looking forward to the next video. Hope this one was helpful.